The type of eye test that I live for. The reason why I'm here. To compare the comparable. You got Deron Williams versus Chris Paul. Prime Deron Williams is who I'm comparing. Prime Chris Paul. I think both players passed their prime. Deron low-key super past his prime, but it's alright. We reeling in that Utah Jazz. Wiggle, wiggle, Deron. You feel me? Top 3 point guards in like 07, 08, around that area. Along with Chris Paul, maybe a B. Diddy or something. But this is one of the most notarized point guard debates. Probably the most notarized point guard debate of my generation. Deron Williams versus Chris Paul, man. Two great offensive players. Two great minds on the court. Two players who used to go at each other, not only in the NBA, but as we have right here, this is college ball. Couldn't ascertain much film of them, so I had to go with some college shit that I found on the tube. You got Wake Forest versus Illinois. Deron, Illinois in the orange. Chris Paul in the black. So, without jibber-jabbering too much, we're going to get into the eye test debate. As I play, the first thing we'll go with is scoring. Who's the better scorer? Now, that's where Deron Williams got the leverage. Deron Williams always was a big body type point guard and always really looked to score first. Whereas Chris Paul was ultimately the quintessential pass first point guard, set up his teammates, get them involved. If y'all need me to get the buquitos, I got you. But if not, I'm going to just run the offense. I'm not trying to exert too much energy, do too much. And also, Deron Williams had a post game. Deron Williams was more isolation prone. So all those make up for the better score. So scoring, I got Deron Williams. Shooting, I got Chris Paul. Though Deron Williams was a great shooter, especially on-ball dribbling, Deron Williams had a patented double cross, which was so icy. After that double cross, he hit you with the pull-up, usually at the top of the key. That's where he usually operated. Oh, nice pass by Deron. So Deron was a decent shooter, but his spot-up jumper wasn't all that. He was more of an on-ball shooter, and he was never a very efficient shooter, even in his prime. I don't know about now on the Cavs. He low-key an old head now, but in his prime, he was never that efficient, always low 40 percentile range. So Chris Paul always, when he's wide open, like his set shot is even better than his off the dribble shot. Chris Paul has a decent off the dribble shot, but he usually has that wind up, take his time shot. And even when he goes off the pick and roll, he still sets himself. He doesn't make leaner shots or any fades. He always sets himself up precisely to pull up for a nice shot. And if it's just a spot up shot, Chris Paul is agua. So shooting, I got Chris Paul. I don't even really think that's too close. Always thought Chris Paul was a decent shooter even in New Orleans, especially spot up. Passing, Chris Paul. Though Deron Williams is a decent, good passer, you're talking about elite point guards in their prime. Chris Paul is one of the best passers in the game and in the game's history. You got Magic, you got Bron, you got Bird, you got Kidd, you got, a multitude of passers. Chris Paul is right up in that demographic of greatest passers. So I got passing Chris Paul alongside IQ. I think Chris Paul is the best brain in basketball. I honestly believe that because when it's time for him to take over, he does as such. He's the best at filling out the moment and what his teammates need from him. So that entails making the right play nearly all the time. So IQ, I got Chris Paul. Post play, I got Deron Williams. Deron Williams actually utilized the post. Though Chris Paul does utilize the post. Let's not get it twisted. And Chris Paul's prime was more extensive. So Deron Williams had maybe 3 years, 4 max of his prime, whereas Chris Paul had maybe 6, 7, 8 years of dominance. And in that Clipper run, he was he would post up a Lillard or he would post up a Kyrie and get an isolation play. So Chris Paul is not without the post, but Deron Williams he could be qualified as a post guard in Utah. He can get you down there, back you down, do a little maybe push shot or floater, or just sheer strength over a guard that's little. He's considered a big guard. So post play, you got D. Will. Now, pick and roll. Like I said, Deron Williams was an isolation player. That's what he perfected. That's what he crafted. Chris Paul is a maestro at the pick and roll. I've not seen anyone as good as Chris Paul when it came to the pick and roll. And mind you, when I've had my biases towards Deron, because I always like the flashy aesthetics. You know, when it comes to this eye test shit, you always go with what appeases the eye. So Deron had the crossovers, and Deron will be breaking down Chris Paul a lot of the times. So Deron was more flashy of the player. But when it came to effectiveness as far as pick and roll, like, you can run no matter who's on Chris Paul's team, you can run pick and roll around him and he'll make an opportunity for you. It can be Emeka Okafor. He played with Okafor and made him a threat. He makes anyone on the floor a threat because his mind alongside that pick and roll, it's a dangerous thing. So pick and roll, I got CP. Mid-range, I do got Deron Williams though, because Deron Williams, once he did create his space, like right there, you know, he got his patent crossovers. Once he created his space, he was looking to utilize the mid-range. So mid-range, I will have Deron. 3-ball, I will have Chris Paul. Overall shooting, I will have Chris Paul. Chris Paul, he had phases where he really didn't miss as far as his Clipper days. Clippers, you know, his athleticism was kind of dwindling. He became more of a shooter. Even last year, he was busting ass. I wouldn't call that prime CP, but last year he was busting ass. So overall shooting, I still got CP. Defense. Now, Deron Williams, that has been one of his downfalls is on the defensive end. He's been lackadaisical. He's never been an intensified defender. Whereas Chris Paul always has been one of the point guards you can count on to play defense, not just on ball. And his on ball is great, mind you. If he wasn't small, he'd be the best perimeter defender in the league to me, just based on his lateral movement, based on his IQ, his nowhere to be, based on his sheer will to, you know what I'm saying, play D. Like until Steph Curry floored him, people always make much of that, but he even handled Steph Curry pretty well one-on-one defensively. It wasn't until Steph Curry came around to where I really start seeing Chris Paul really get torched like that. The Steph Currys and the D Roses, the kind of the point guards that kind of followed Chris Paul in the Deron era, they came and they kind of lit CP up. That's the first time I start seeing that. But aside from that, and even still defensively, Chris Paul is going to be in front of you. Chris Paul is going to be one of the league leaders in steals. He's not going to get too many blocks, but that doesn't matter because he can contest well. Chris Paul is going to rip the bigs. He's a great defender. Now, Deron Williams, I wouldn't flinch at calling him a great defender because he's just not that. So defense, obviously, I got CP. Now, rebounding, it can go either way because Deron's the bigger body, but Chris Paul, with the IQ that he has, he always knows where to be. So, essentially, he's going to be there for a board. He's going to get 3, 4, 5 boards a game. So, rebounding, that'll be kind of a wash to me. Intangibles, I definitely go CP because when you talk about intensity, when you talk about will, you talk about heart, you talk about desire, you talk about clutch, you talk about all these things that you can't measure with stats. Chris Paul is the point guard in which you want. You ask all the coaches around the league, you ask all the players. He's one of those players who wants to win so badly, he's chopping at the bit to play a Kobe, to play a Bron. Like I remember when Bron was number one. They always put the nigga number one on ESPN. But I remember one year, Paul was like 3. He was like, hey, I'm chasing you. That's just the type of mentality he is. He's not satisfied with 3. He's not satisfied with no rings. I know he's still thirsty as fuck for that ring. Modeled after Isaiah Thomas. Just a less scorer, more passer type Isaiah. So, intangibles, I got CP clearly. Now, if we can choose any other finishing at the rim, I got Deron though. Deron was the better finish. Chris Paul has a nice floater. I say he has a better floater than Deron, but when it came to finishing at the rim, drawing contact, and even dunking on somebody, Deron Williams was that type. Deron Williams, also another one cut from that Baron Davis, big, you know what I'm saying, bulky guard type, might bang on your shit. Deron was that. So attacking at the rim, I got Deron. And I'm trying to figure out if there's any more categories in which I can place Deron. But as far as leadership, I can't. Deron wasn't even vocal. Deron in Utah, I wouldn't even consider Deron the leader in Utah. He was just more of the playmaker. I don't think Utah really had a player leader. They had their coach was the leader essentially. And what I've noticed is after Utah, Deron's game really descended. And I wanna ask if that's just due to the system that he had in Utah. Was the system just favored for a player like Deron, where he can get his wiggle on? I know they had a lot of picks off the ball in which Deron can get his isolation situations, whereas his new situation in Brooklyn after Utah, he wasn't as good, and now it's just all downhill from there. So I will have to question why his drop off was so heavy. But overall, man, I got CP, and my bias was always towards Deron at the time. But then I grow older and I start realizing the asset that Chris Paul really is to a team. He can turn nothing into something easy. I don't think Deron is capable of turning nothing into something. I just think he's a great scorer at point guard, and I think that his prime didn't extend as much for me to catapult him over CP. CP is a legend, Hall of Famer. Deron might get the nod at a Hall of Famer. I don't think so. You have to leverage your career from that point of your prime too. You know what I'm saying? You got to keep the shit going. So overall, I got Chris Paul. Deron Williams to me is the better offensive player though. He has a better crossover. Chris Paul has more handles. That's the difference. I want to explain that on this eye test shit. It's a difference between handles and crossover. Crossover is just a subset of handles, while handles is the whole enchilada. Whether or not you get ripped, whether or not you can maneuver, weave through traffic, handles is essentially every part of dribbling, whereas the crossover is just one facet. Deron had a better cross. Chris Paul to me has better handles. I rarely seen Chris Paul get ripped. So yeah, man, overall, man, D. Will, CP, this has been one to debate for years. Prime, of course. It's unfair to put somebody in their prime and somebody past their prime. So prime, I got CP3, man. If you got D. Will, holla at me. If you got CP, holla at me. If I missed any categories, let your boy know. It's your boy Dame, man. Subscribe to me. Eye test shit. Peace.